Welcome back to episode 56. Today we're going to talk about combining web parts, which will also introduce a new type class that I haven't talked about yet. We're going to do some of our importing stuff here, and we've got our base web part that we have. So we're going to continue building out the prototype of this. We still have our run from earlier, from the previous one. I've omitted the functor stuff, but we have run so that we can test this as we get done. So two of the things that we're going to want are pure and fail. And these are basically just because the concept of our web part is essentially it's a function that returns an either of a future of something. And so fail is basically just going to return an either left, and then pure is just going to return either of a future of. And so when we're talking about combining two things, what we're talking about is a semigroup. And that sounds maybe like another word, kind of like monad or some of the others that maybe seems scary, but you're using semigroups all the time. So let's look at what semigroup is. So a semigroup, for a semigroup of A, what you want is, given some A and another A, to return an A. Well, as it turns out, you're doing that all the time, right? That's math with addition. You know, you take a number and you do a plus sign and then another number, and then you return a new number. And so that's an instance of a semigroup. What we want to do is, for our web part, we want to make our web parts a semigroup too. And the reason that we want to do that is because we want our application is going to be run by running a web part. Well, we want to be able to take a whole bunch of different web parts and combine them all together to make one web part. And so that's where semigroup comes in. The Fantasyland spec for semigroup says that we should use the term concat rather than a plus operator or something. And so that's what we're going to do. And so there's probably a more concise way of writing this, but this is the way that I've chosen to write it. Hopefully it's clearer from a more imperative kind of way of how we're doing this. So the concept here being is that if we're on the prototype, then that means we have a web part. So in this case, our web part is this first A. This WP, actually technically this WP.fn is our first A, but this WP is going to represent our first A. We already have that because we're dealing with that instance. This F is going to be the second A. So what we need to do is we need to return then a new web part. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to return our new web part. And web part, now we're going to take, it's going to receive, the web part is a function. So now we're into the parts of what makes up the web part. So what we're going to do is we're going to take whatever value ends up getting passed, and we're going to apply it to the function that's held by our first web part. And then we're having to do this thing here because we don't have pattern matching, and because not everything's an expression in JavaScript, and because future fork returns void or unit, and so I can't just continue returning one expression here. So what we're going to do is we're going to set this result here, and we're going to do a pattern match. So we're going to we're going to apply whatever the value from this request is to this function, which is going to then return our either of a future of something. So we've got to destructure our either. So we destructure our either. If it's an error, then the result here is going to be a fail of an error, which comes up to here because we want to persist the fact that this failed for some reason. And typically with what we're doing with the web part, that would be like some sort of 404. So if a route did not match or a method did not match or something like that. So then once we've got that, if the either is a right, then inside of that's going to be our future. And what we can do is then we can fork on the future. If that's an error, then we're just going to return pure and pass that error, which seems kind of weird. Why would we return a pure? Well, because we can't return a fail. Because if we returned a fail from this, then the next time then when it actually gets run, it's going to look like it was a 404 when in fact it was more of a 500 kind of an error because of that future failing. And then if everything is fine, then what we'll have eventually with our web part, it'll be some sort of context. So we can set our result to be whatever the F here, because this is a web part. So to actually run the thing, we have to take whatever that is and put it into our run function here. to make this happen, and then we can actually return whatever the result was. So you see that we are kind of using mutable state here to be able to make this work, and that's largely due to JavaScript and the libraries that I'm working with here. There's probably an easier way to write this, but this is what I'm going with now. The important part here at the end is that it works and it allows us to write functional code, not so much that this library was functional. So what is that going to look like? What's our test going to look like? Well, so we're going to have a web part here, and we're going to take a new web part, and we're just going to pass pure. Basically, that means whatever comes into it, we'll send it back out. So this is the same thing as saying, is kind of like the identity. So if we had a web part that was a function of x, and it would return pure of x. So it's kind of like the identity, really, the identity function for our for what goes in a web part is pure. And then what we want to do is we want to concat a new web part that's pure. So this basically we're saying we can concat as many pure web parts to this as we want. We can continue concatenating web parts, and ultimately it's going to return one web part. So if we say WP and we call run and we pass a 1 to it, then 1 should equal 1, because we're really not doing anything to it. We're just proving that we can concat these web parts together. And so if we run this, we see that we get 1 equals 1 is exactly what we would expect. So in this case, our test case is really pretty trivial and simple, and you're probably not going to use that. But the cool thing here is that because we have this concat now, we can take multiple web parts together, we can add them, we can combine them all together and create one web part. And it's a way of combining all sorts of different things up into one. So you have it. That's introduced Semigroup. For what Semigroup is, you'll see this all over the place. Numbers and math, numbers and addition, numbers and multiplication, all of these different things are instances of semigroups. And in this case, we've implemented Semigroup for our web part so that we can concat these things together. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.